CNN has learned why special counsel Robert Mueller wants help from former Trump campaign deputy chair Rick Gates. Court filings suggest that Mueller is going after bigger fish as he investigates contacts between President Trump's campaign and Russia. Let's discuss with CNN national security analyst, former director of national intelligence, James Clapper. Director, thank you so much for being with us. The news this week was that Rick Gates was in contact with Konstantin Kilimnik. This is this individual with ties to Russian intelligence. Was that man on your radar during your time as DNI?
No, he was not. In fact, a lot of these, as he's come out in these indictments and that sort of thing, were really not known to us when, before the end of the Obama administration.
What does it tell you that Robert Mueller is investigating this connection and wants Gates to help illuminate really the nature of those contacts?
Well, first, John, I think we got to remember that whatever it is that's out in the public domain, that the Mueller team, the special counsel, is way ahead of us. And so clearly, he's, from what we can read into the tea leaves here inferentially, he's pursuing the collusion route. Understanding that collusion is a nebulous term, certainly legally, but that's it appears to me that's where it's going here. And what is significant to me is a prominent Trump camp official meeting with a Russian intelligence official, and it doesn't matter whether he's active or retired, because those guys never really retire. And that, to me, just the fact of the meeting, when you sort of piece that together with all the other pieces of the puzzle, is one more indicator of the direction that the special counsel is taking.
So the fact of these conversations between Rick Gates, maybe Paul Manafort, and this person who had contacts and connections and maybe had one point been an agent for the GRU, does that in and of itself constitute collusion to you?
Well, it doesn't necessarily constitute the substance of collusion, because just like the situation we faced before the end of the Obama administration, we knew about a lot of meetings going on, but we actually didn't know the substantive content of the discussions. And here again, at least publicly, we don't know that either. I suspect the Mueller team does.
One of the things that's happened this week, the United States has expelled 60 Russian diplomats. This in response to the poisoning of a former Russian double agent in the UK. Do you feel that response from the United States was sufficient?
Well, it's certainly more than sufficient for the narrow purpose here, which is to stand shoulder to shoulder with the UK after this egregious crime that the Russians committed in the UK. I was just in the UK earlier this week, and certainly people there were gratified and I think relieved that, and in all honesty, a little surprised at the magnitude of the expulsions that we undertook. But as far as the broader context of Russia's behavior here and their very aggressive information operations campaign, which they are still waging, as they did during the election and the run-up to it, that's not stopped, and this action in and of itself won't do that.
Administration supporters say, look at our actions while President Trump has been in office. Expelling these diplomats, which is a very high number. I don't think we've seen this high of a number since the Reagan administration. Look at the fact that they're arming Ukraine with Javelin missiles. Look at the fact that, Donald Trump, President Trump, took military action in Syria against Assad, Russia's ally here. Their actions are as firm against the Russians, they say, as anything that has come before. How would you respond to that?
Well, it's to me suggests, if I can coin the term, sort of governmental schizophrenia here, because we seem to have the established government taking some resolute action against the Russians. But what is striking by contrast is the absence of any pronouncement by the president himself. And that's very curious. It's hard to understand, and certainly hard for people overseas to rationalize what this is about. So I think that's in this particular instance, the fact the president doesn't mention the 60 expulsions, but in the larger context of what I think the country needs in terms of leadership to thwart what the Russians are trying to do, which is basically undermine our fundamental system. And, each of the cabinet departments that are relevant are doing their own thing here, but what is needed is some overarching leadership and a sense of urgency to do something about what the Russians are doing.
Last question here. Let me ask you about incoming National Security Advisor John Bolton. He had a very important meeting yesterday with the Defense Secretary James Mattis. The two had never met, and we got a little bit of a hot mic moment here. Let's listen in.
Ambassador Bolton.
Mr. Secretary, it's so good to see you. Thank you for inviting me over.
Oh, no. Thanks for coming, and it's good to finally meet you. Absolutely. I've heard that you're absolutely devil incarnate. I wanted to meet you.
I've heard that you're the devil incarnate, Secretary Mattis said to John Bolton. Which you're laughing. You think it's funny. What's your take on John Bolton?
Well, first, I think it's another example of Jim Mattis's, Secretary Mattis's deft use of humor. And he's very good. He's very good at that. And yes, John Bolton, whom I don't know personally, but just watching, is clearly hawkish. He's certainly in that category with respect to Iran and North Korea, and oh, by the way, Russia. That's going to be interesting. But I don't think that hawkish necessarily means reckless. And I do think